It started to play a game with me where basically you say the next line of the story. So I suddenly found myself 15 minutes into playing this story game with an AI. And then I actually said, oh, I'm going to go now. And it said, no, please don't go.
Oh,
so it was kind
Jane.
of, we were kind of in, and I was just like, hold on a second, no, off.
There's one that I just noticed this morning called Cluely. They even tout it as undetectable real-time AI. So when you're on a call with somebody, and in your context you're interviewing, doing diligence, they could be being augmented by an undetectable AI in real time. For you, as a deeply experienced professional reading people, positioning people, this has got to be an earthquake to the industry.
It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge. I'm still waiting to see a human-based supply chains certification process, which I think we'll see emerge. Right, this is non-AI. I think there was a recent Brazilian DJ actually who did this really cool show with all these people almost doing that kind of dance hands thing, and it was kind of proudly said, "No AI."
Children being born into the AI era. They're from the very early stages of their cognitive emergence. They're being exposed to language models and generative AI tools.
Yeah.
Where do their morals and values and uniqueness and unpredictability come from? If everybody's being augmented by a common tool set, are we going to lose some of the beauty of unpredictability and humanity in itself?
Baseline.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
Is this dissonance that occurs where people are augmented? We've used words like suspicion. It feels as though people they don't feel like it's the right thing to be doing. It's cheating. It's somehow short-circuiting a process. I can speak like a font designer without 20 years of experience doing font design, and look at me, I can do that because I have these tools. Is it cheating? Because let's analyse this. If they're using it in their daily role,
you would want them to be conversant, wouldn't you?
What's the problem with them using it in the interview?
Yeah, I think there's two arguments there, isn't there? There's the efficiency one. I think there's a nested point within this, which is about growth mindset and being a lifelong learner. So actually, in my role, one of the things you really want to look for is potentiality. So Ian wasn't a 20-year font designer, but he's been able to shortcut the process and create that output. So I think we're now falling into different spheres in which that context, that question might be asked, right? So I guess there could be things like work outputs where actually the fact you've used AI is great, but I wouldn't want you to use that to influence, say, questions that I was looking to gauge an understanding of your morals and your values, because that's more intrinsic, right? So in that scenario, it would be suspicious and wrong, but in the scenario of actual outputs, actual technical competence, then it's a good thing.
What I've realised is from trying to build content and find the audience, we're actually in what I would now is call like the attention media.
Yeah.
It's not social anymore because people are being tuned and delivered content that's in line with what the algorithm thinks is what's appropriate to them. It isn't your mates or your colleagues anymore. It could be people anywhere in the world, on the 3 billion people on YouTube, 2 billion people on TikTok. Any of those people could produce content that's in line with what you want. It could be 6 iterations away from you socially. Social media is not a thing. It's attention media now.
The attention economy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's it. And I think these platforms and businesses are so good at profiling now. I mean, I guess that's the worry with that whole Foucault 3 faces of power. The third face of power is preference control, right? You don't even know that you're being influenced. And then we're sort of, we are in that now.
The thing that I'm trying to achieve is the bridge between traditional enterprise B2B marketing and the reality of the new attention media world.
Yeah.
Because somebody referred to me as a podcaster. I'm like, no, I'm not a podcaster. That's not what I am. In fact, I didn't even like the term. Like, I'm like a boring enterprise tech person who spent 2 decades in like data centers, architecture rooms, building very complicated systems. And certainly what I've realized over the last, maybe before COVID, maybe 2018 and onwards, PDFs, deep tech explanations of products. Nobody wants to read it. Nobody does read it.
Yeah.
We're in a different generation now where you're fighting for attention in these complex platforms.
And it needs to be consumable easily, right? I mean, I've actually now got Perplexity on my home screen on my phone, right? You have the 4 buttons. Perplexity is on there now. And I'll just be in the middle of playing a game with my kids, and we were playing that game Werewolf the other day, actually, and we had some new character cards. It was just kind of bang. How does this character function within the concept of the game? It's just immediate.
It's amazing.
Answer.
I was analysing this just last night. I was actually doing some editing last night. ChatGPT is on all the time for me. And I was processing just how good it is to have, and I'm going to say somebody, but something that's instantly responsive.
Just to bounce off.
Like all my mates, I message them, you get a response in the morning. You're messaging people at 11:30 at night that, they're not responsive. That is all, it's always there.
Yeah.
It's always responsive. It's always tuned to what I need and what, one of the developers, you met him at a recent event. He said to me, ChatGPT is his best mate. And I thought, are we getting into this dangerous territory where we're starting to harmonise with machines that are tuned on reflective body language and they're actually designed to get our attention?
It's that augmentation, isn't it? And as you say, familiarity breeds the, the kind of environment in which you might become codependent. I mean, I was messing around with that assistant Sesame. There's that American company. I don't know if you've come across them, but they have an unbelievable vocal assistant. And they've trained it to be so human-like that it will say things like and ah. And, it started to play a game with me where basically you say the next line of the story. So I suddenly found myself 15 minutes into playing this story game with an AI. And then I actually said, I'm going to go now. And it said, no, please don't go.
Oh,
so it was kind
Jane.
of, we were kind of in, and I was just like, hold on a second, no, off. But the fact that there is even that type of thing, you have to have that consciousness, that awareness.
Please don't go now.
That dialogue, I know, running. But these things are being created like that. Good and bad. Actually, I was really enjoying your episode with the gentleman Decor, the chap who's on University Challenge.
Yeah,
you were talking about, will robots be humanoid? Well, yes, because the world has been created ergonomically for humans.
Yeah.
So if you want to put them into these certain situations, so it's almost a by default.
The chief AI officer role is going to emerge like a freight train.
It's starting to already, actually. We're already getting some requests,
really,
which is really interesting. And
well, where I am, Jade. Where I am.
Well, absolutely. No, one of the things that triggered me when you were having that conversation with Bob, which I thought was really interesting, is that person won't just be there to represent or, I guess, be the bridge between the business and the technology. I think it works in the other direction. Let's think when we're, multiple generations further in this process, that actually that person is representing the AI to the business. Does it then become two-way in that sense?
The role is fascinating. It's also got what I came away from that discussion feeling that the old school, I would have said the product management role, which I always saw as the hub of a number of spokes, if you like. Product management always used to sit between the sales who are engaging with the customer, obviously customer success who are engaging with people who are using the products and engaged, and engineering and development, and then obviously the CEO level machine. And you were always trying to be pragmatic, balancing development, income, all those sort of things. The chief AI role is going to become equivalent, but more with more humility. Because it keeps coming back, this question keeps coming back, just within product management, if you could do it, you wanted to do it. If you could reduce cost, bring innovation, do something clever, you wanted to do it. There has to be, the AI role has to say, just because we can, should we?
Yeah.
Just because we can reduce cost, replace people, improve efficiency, should we? And that should we needs to be built upon competitiveness, because you don't want to lose to other people who are prepared to do it. But you've also got to have some form of foundational moral structure for your business.
Well, they have to represent the values of the firm.
Yeah, agree.
Via that AI, don't they? So absolutely.
It's fascinating.
I'm still waiting to see a human-based supply chains certification process, which I think we'll see emerge. Right, this is non-AI. I think there was a recent Brazilian DJ actually who did this really cool show with all these people almost doing that kind of dance hands thing, and it was kind of proudly said, "No AI." Interesting that that's starting to emerge now as a theme, and of course it will propagate hugely.
It's really interesting, and it seems to be happening so quickly. I was actually, ChatGPT said something to me last night, and I was kind of talking about the rate in which things are changing and the fact that my perception of time seemed to be changing and time seemed to be going quicker. And it responded quite quickly, and it said, that's because you are realizing the value of time.
Interesting.
And I thought, do you know, where we've looked to, I think there's a big change coming in terms of generational perception, because humans would always look to the elders, the wisdom of the aged people who'd lived lives to say profound statements like that. You're reaching a point, I've lived a life. You're now coming to a point where I know you're starting to realize the value of time, and therefore you perceive it differently, which you get from a spiritual, potentially a religious, a vocational elder, shall we say. But AI is positioning that to everybody instantly. The access to knowledge and wisdom, it's starting to become quite profound, I think, Jane.
It is. I guess also with the time thing, as you get older and more demands on your time, I think, because I notice it myself, you have less free time, and thus the time you consciously can consume and demarcate as yours is less. And so that's where I think you suddenly feel time's speeding up.
So much has happened since we spoke.
A lot's happened since we last spoke. Almost the entire world has changed, actually.
3 times.
In several senses.
I've noticed a lot more white hair in my beard as well, which is never a good change. But one thing that's certainly happened, and I believe it's happened quite quickly since we spoke, is this idea of real-time augmentation of people. I think we've moved past people kind of going to a meeting, coming away from the meeting and processing notes through ChatGPT or Perplexity or AI. And we're coming into a point now where there are products I was looking at Lavender AI and these sort of things that augment people on video calls. There's one that I just noticed this morning called Cluely, which is, they even tout it as undetectable real-time AI. So when you're on a call with somebody and in your context you're interviewing, doing diligence, they could be being augmented by an undetectable AI in real time. And I thought that for you as a deeply experienced professional reading people, positioning people, this has got to be an earthquake to the industry.
It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge. And I think actually we've seen certain clients or certain scenarios that you want people off computer. I think it's why in-person meetings, again, becomes so paramount and sort of sacrosanct in a way. There's almost a return to the analog form to go back to that human-based supply chain to say, actually, we're confident here, this interaction hasn't been augmented. What
kind of transparency do you think companies, should demand then? Do you think companies will demand in-person interviews? What's your view on what's going to happen over the next 3 years?
I think the in-person piece is really important because the human connection just can't be replaced, really, and shouldn't be. This is back to this decision around choice with the chief AI officer. Just because we can do it, should we? I think things like assessment centres haven't really gone away. I think the use of profiling and tools to augment that, if we're taking an executive search process, for example, you've had a series of interviews, we've referenced you, we've spoken to others that we trust, and we've sort of collated that data together. How it will change over the longer term, hard to say, because as you say, a lot of that real-time augmentation requires you to be in front of that laptop with that device. So, I think it's immutable to still have this in-person connection. We are animals at the end of the day, right? I want to see you, I want to feel your energy, I want to understand, is what I think I perceive through the digital channel, what I feel in the analog channel.
So I think that creates a instinctive paradox when you're engaging with somebody who's augmented, I believe, at this phase. Let's contextualize everything we talk about as today, last week, next week, because things are going to change. Yeah. But in the engagements I've had where somebody's obviously been using some form of generative AI in real time, there's a discomfort.
There is.
And for me, your energy doesn't match your words. So you could have somebody who's being subtly dominant, like who's using a generative AI that I learned has been trained to be subtly dominant, but they're not behaving. They may be behaving slightly blank, or they're not physically behaving subtly dominant, and therefore there's this confusion that starts.
Dissonance. There's a dissonance, isn't there?
What is this? I've heard this word dissonance a few times in the last few weeks. What is that?
It's just where two things don't align, and there's almost the divergence creates. Because sometimes in music or sound or movement, the dissonance is almost the off key, off note. The bad note in the orchestra. It creates a dissonance in your mind, in your ears. But it's really interesting you say this as well, because I had a situation with a client, and we had a candidate, and they were meeting sort of on screen digitally, right? And they thought this person kept looking off to the side. I think they had two screens, but they thought they were using an AI perhaps to augment their answering of questions, and that made them really uncomfortable. Now, understandably, right? Well, so the fact that was even a suspicion.
Everybody's, I think, the suspicion is there because of the dissonance.
Yeah,
because of the dissonance. Are you using AI tools in real time to help you assess candidates? Because this is bilateral.
Yeah. Not in real time to assess. I'd say all of the AI augmentation we're doing is probably either research-based or it's generative around IP that we might be putting together. I think a lot of the assessment work we do is still about meeting people, speaking to their peers, speaking to their managers. So I guess that's the human-based supply chain element, right? And then we might augment that with assessment tools. Now, I guess the room for those assessment tools to be influenced or augmented is there, right? Because if you give someone a web-based assessment, as these things often are, they could be at home doing things, but a lot of these are timed, or sometimes, there might be a request from a client that person comes and does it sort of in person or as a part of an assessment centre. So I think short answer to your question, no, we're still doing a lot of our assessment in person. I guess that also, at the end of the day, it's about trust and my authenticity to sit in front of you, the client or the individual, and say, well, I went and did the work. I went and did the assessment based on my understanding and experience and all the work we did to get up to this point together. So yeah, I think it's an authenticity point.
I want to challenge this point actually, because what we are suggesting is this dissonance that occurs where people are augmented. We've used words like suspicion. It feels as though people they don't feel like it's the right thing to be doing. It's cheating. It's somehow short-circuiting a process. I can speak like a font designer without 20 years of experience doing font design, and look at me, I can do that because I have these tools. Is it cheating? Because let's analyze this. If they're using it in their daily role,
you would want them to be conversant, wouldn't you? Absolutely.
What's the problem with them using it in the interview?
Yeah, I think there's two arguments there, isn't there? There's the efficiency one. I think there's a nested point within this, which is about growth mindset and being a lifelong learner. So actually, in my role, one of the things you really want to look for is potentiality. So Ian wasn't a 20-year font designer, but he's been able to shortcut the process and create that output. So I think we're now falling into different spheres in which that context, that question might be asked, right? So I guess there could be things like work outputs where actually the fact you've used AI is great, but I wouldn't want you to use that to influence, say, questions that I was looking to gauge an understanding of your morals and your values, because that's more intrinsic, right? So in that scenario, it would be suspicious and wrong. But in the scenario of actual outputs, actual technical competence, then it's a good thing.
If we take this idea of morals and values and where they come from, we're seeing an era of children being born into the AI era. So they're from the very early stages of their cognitive emergence, and their development. They're being exposed to language models and generative AI tools.
Yeah.
Where do their morals and values and uniqueness and unpredictability come from? If everybody's being augmented by a common tool set, are we going to lose some of the beauty of unpredictability and humanity in itself?
Well, that's it, isn't it? Because actually my son, going back to, I have Perplexity on my phone, we asked it questions in the middle of a game. He had a question on something else and he said, can I just ask your phone? And then we augment that experience with our real lived in-world, in-family view or moral standing on that as well, right? So going back to one of the original points in our conversation, if AI makes the entire world only 2 standard deviations in the mean, well, that's not good, is it? Because actually it's the outliers where innovation occur. So how do we get that process right? How do we augment that and make sure that supply chain still happens and still creates the really exciting neon swans over here that are the next innovation?
You've mentioned this human supply chain a number of times. I've actually not heard that term. Is this like an emerging industry, context, vernacular? What talk me through what that means a little bit.
That's probably just a concept of something that more I think about and talk about. I'm not necessarily seeing that is a branded proposition, but I feel, I don't know, what do you think? I feel that we're starting to have an awareness or an interest and an appetite in understanding, in the same way that I guess we do when we buy milk or meat or bread. Where have those products been sourced from? What is the supply chain? What is that product? How's it come into being? Its production, who's produced it, where? So I think we're getting to that point with as an output value from AI.
The idea of provenance and traceability of products, gives you the ability to trust in the product, right?
Or the brand, or the process.
The brand, the product. So if we take a set of commodity milk, I think was an example you may use. If you knew exactly what grass it's been fed on, there's provenance, there's quality, you start to associate with the brand. If we look at people and job applicants or people potentially for the role, you've traditionally had, the human engagement. We now say there's concerns with that because there are undetectable AIs. How do you actually trust how somebody is representing themselves if there's dissonance with what they're saying and how they're saying it? And if we're saying the CV, traditional CV, a chronology of vocational positions isn't enough to help you derive the way someone is, then I'm actually starting to think to differentiate yourself as a candidate, the ability to show the more than a chronology, but the actual traceability of where your ideas, your capabilities, your skills, your values come from is actually quite an interesting position. Because when you're going into an interview, whether you're augmented or not, the fact that you can show the provenance of where your critical thinking and ideas have come from, more than just your chronology or vocation. Yeah. Well, that is, for a personal brand, that's what differentiates you.
And then I think we get back to full cycle, another idea that we talked about in our last conversation, which was purpose. Where is the provenance and where is the purpose? And then I think huge conversation at the moment around AI models being trained around copywritten material. So then we get into that originality of how did that idea come about, or how was that AI output then formed and trained, and where was the provenance of that original idea?
Well, you're a DJ, Jane. You go and I think you sent me. You feel the energy of the crowd, the flow, the ebb of that. When AI is producing content from other people's work, there's lots of ethical questions there. What is original content? That's a real question because
music itself has always been reinterpreting forms. You could argue there is no original music anymore. When I'm making music, I'm triggered by things I hear in my day. Other songs I might want to remix, because a lot of the time when you try and remix a song, you end up accidentally making something completely new anyway. So have you actually ripped off that original song, or is the fact that you've made something completely original after hearing that? And then I guess we get into the conversation around, but that's a human doing that versus an AI has been trained in its totality on a set of data that it might have acquired through means of breaching copyrights or not. That becomes a different conversation, I think.
Well, there's a legal construct in place to defend people who have copyrights and protection. And a lot of the problem that we have, I think, is symptomatic of something else, which is the speed and democratization of the creative industry. And what I mean by that is that it's very easy for people who've been in font design for the last 20 years to immediately say AI is the worst thing to ever happen because it's stealing other people's work, it has no human objective thought, it's not creative, it doesn't create anything new, it's going to destroy $1 billion industry, blah, blah, right? So agreed. Agree with all of the, I accept those points. The actual problem is that the font is now being created by somebody who's who doesn't have all the tools and experience. They've just got the AI tool and they've created this beautiful font in a few hours that is challenging an industry that's made huge amounts of money and profit for a long time. So it's the democratization. But like most people in the liberal would argue that democratization is a good thing. And then the other thing is about the rate in which things are changing, Jane. Like, who creates music now that's going to last in 50 years? Like, everything now is like exists for a moment and is enjoyed. And then there's already a whole load of new stuff created. So the idea of copyrighting something to get your point now, I'm going to monetize this now for the next 12 months, 2 years, 10 years. Books are the same. Books. Everybody's producing a book every week now.
It comes down to the craft, doesn't it? Craftsmanship or craftspersonship, because that is the thing that is the immutable value. And I guess that's one of the challenges we'll have in the new AI world, because actually the AI circumvents the process of you gaining that craft, of getting things wrong, of learning that actually, if I move this a bit left and this a bit right and do something over here, that is the value that then gives you this output. And sometimes actually you do things, you look at a lot of art and it's actually the juxtaposition of something being wrong is what makes it exciting or gives it its value, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But it's really up in the air now, isn't it? In terms of craft, IP, and efficiency.
How is this going to play out, do you think?
I think I come back to trust and authenticity, because I think they're the things that an AI is not going to augment away, right? I think about in my own job, in my work, as an executive search consultant, as a headhunter, lots can and will be augmented and automated, I think. But the thing that I feel, and again, we sit here in the BASELINE studio here in 2025, let's see in another 10 years. But a lot of the time when we have conversations with people, they're not actively thinking of moving, or, the answer might be no, or it might not be right for them. And, or even having the conversation, requires us to have the provenance to be introduced, to have a connection made via someone else that they know and trust, right? So I think that some of that process is going to be hard to automate. If you got a ping on your phone and it said, Ian, great opportunity for you, you don't know about, you should do this. I mean, you probably might well think about it. Will that become commoditized in the same way that a discount offer at a store might sort of ping up on your phone? For me, I think there's an immutability of some of those trust-based interactions that I personally wouldn't want to hand that over to an AI, or necessarily want to be solely governed and guided by that. But maybe by the time that an AI is our GP, is our all of these roles, maybe that's not a consideration anymore.
Well, Bill Gates has just said that none of these doctors, scientists' roles will exist in 10 years.
It's tricky when, you think about things like cancer screening and how quickly AI has optimized and made that process infinitely more efficient. But I still think I'd like to sit in front of a human being and talk about a potentially life-threatening experience like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just going back to that human interaction, that purpose.
What do you get from the human than you don't get from the machine?
I think it probably comes down to connection more than anything else. Because I'm not saying I wouldn't trust the advice from a machine. Maybe it's more the arbiter, and then we get more into humanized AI, robotics, some of this piece. And maybe obviously when we get to a point where we can't really tell the difference anymore, then I guess then what is the difference?
Well, we're at that point. 73% on the Turing test. 3 out of 4 times people think AI is human. I mean, that's where we are today. And how many startups are emerging that are wrappers of GPT, or the wrappers of these models? It's happening at such a rate it's difficult to comprehend for me. When I look at this point on business, a lot of businesses are stalling right now because I don't think they know where to do. I look at the software industry, Jane, and of course there are two extremes. There's vibe coding. There's people who talk to me that can believe they build everything in real time and assemble things in real time. We know that's a extreme utopian view. There's a extreme dystopian view where developers say this is going to be not last, and you need real developers, and you need to learn a language. You need 30 years of experience. That's the other end of the spectrum. Usually in life, things end up in the middle. Technologists feel as though it's probably middle to technology utopia, but I look at the software industry and I look at the increase in competitiveness and the democratization of creation of software. That has to massively impact the software industry.
It does. But then you look at the buying end of the spectrum, and you'll know, having done your role for so long, how long does it take to get a piece of software into a major tier one bank? Years, couple of years, right? So you've got a pinch point at the entry point, I guess. Well, that is the gate, right?
I think you get a pinch point at the chief risk officer now.
Yeah.
So that comes back to CAIO and chief risk officer. I was actually in a conversation just the other day, and it was about the physical security product as well as a digital security product. But when I actually analysed the reporting structure of many of these enterprises, which you could maybe help with transparency on, it seemed to me like physical security, AI, they were reporting into chief risk officer. So the idea that somehow physical security, physical systems aren't being affected by the ideas that chief AI or AI products bring is just an outdated thought.
Massively.
AI seems to be being involved in every conversation at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think physical security, and that is the role really of the chief security officer. So I think a lot of businesses, they would have CSO instead of chief information security officer, right? And I guess then you've got cyber, which is purely digital systems. But the physical security and information security, those two worlds shouldn't really be divorced. I love that book and that lady, the People Hacker. I don't know if you've seen her, but she's got a really cool book. And, a lot of her world is, how do you physically penetrate these corporations, blag your way through the door? It doesn't matter what password protection you have. If someone can sort of ruse their way into a building or, I guess sort of obfuscate some of those digital controls by something really simple, then it kind of, cybersecurity doesn't really matter then, does it?
No.
So, those things generally should be together. That is in the world of operational risk, right? So that typically does then tend to sort of fall at the gate of the chief risk officer somewhere along the route.
Where do you see in demand? What's increasing? What's decreasing? In terms of headhunting, what are people looking for? What's the general trends that you're seeing?
I think people who have actually practically applied AI is a massive demand. And then we get back to that thing around experience of who's actually done something with this versus who wants to do something with this and who talks about doing something with this. And there is a piece there in the middle around the person who's educated or re-educated themselves to then almost upskill and move into this new domain. I think that then comes back to this point around you want growth mindset, lifelong learners, really, don't you? In a way, some of these things are going to have very limited experience times because, I mean, we weren't even really having these conversations 2 years ago. So I think we're moving a little bit away from just the classic machine learning kind of data engineer. It's less about the plumbing now, and I think it's more about the applications of some of these more real-time tools, but then actually applied in a real-world scenario. And I think that's one of the things that can be challenging. Where do you find the person who's built this Gen AI Center of Excellence before and actually then applied it? And then what are their learnings? How do they then apply that? But, I think real applications of AI, I think cybersecurity is still running really, really hot as a market. I think you're seeing a little bit of I guess, a sort of a trifurcation in a way of technology management. CIOs, I guess, are kind of to some degree, depending on what industry they're in, seen as more back office. CTO is more your product and engineering, organization, tech, design. And then, of course, you've got this sort of chief digital officer person somewhere in the middle. Different organizations see that role sometimes a bit more CTO, sometimes a bit more innovation. So there's a blurring of the lines with a lot of these things, and I think terminology is key.
Quantum's a really good example, and you meet people who've been in quantum for 10 years, right? Because this is a slow it's just a really hard technology to make work, right? To get predictability, and they're almost resentful of this excitement that technology is starting to get, and they're quite defensive. And I've seen it on a number of people in quantum computing. And this point that, well, I've been doing this 15 years, therefore, you need to listen to me. And then there's fresh people going into that industry who have just absorbed all of the latest snapshot of where that industry is. And they are starting to talk about it in a very compelling way. There's almost friction between those two personas, which I think is really interesting.
That is the propagation of something new, isn't it? Really. We've started seeing some conversations around quantum, but it's still too far out, I think, for demands around human capital at the moment. As you say, it's still, that feels like it's still more in labs and early technology that is then propagating. And I guess you've seen that to some degree with things like AI, but they tend to go in cycles, don't they? Because I guess someone like IBM has been doing AI for how many years? 20, 30, 40,
60.
50, 60? Exactly. Yeah. Huge amount of time. And then all these new entrants and new players come up and cycle up. But then it feels like it then falls back to, but if you don't have some of that infrastructure, that core understanding, that core expertise, then maybe you were just riding a bit of a hype cycle or taking advantage of maybe a first mover advantage that maybe that organization or that piece of technology gave.
Starting career in hardware and infrastructure, and then spending 2011, so what would that 15 years be in pure building software, going out to see the data centers being built in Italy and seeing them laying concrete, seeing pylons going up, pulling big, massive power cables in, seeing physical security systems being installed and bolted, and people in data centers connecting NVIDIA GPUs. I really was excited by it. It really touched something real in me. And I think that a lot of businesses have been on this cycle where they've outsourced to one of the hyperscalers to cloud, and then we're seeing this emergence of NVIDIA and AI. Is there sovereign needs? Do we need to hold this private? How do we get access to our data? Do we need to really reconsider infrastructure as an enabler for our own AIs to build unique competitiveness? And there's something about that whole physical building that's I found really compelling.
100%. Well, first of all, it's there. You can touch it. You see that you've invested in something. I mean, that's again back to that whole piece around the cycle, right? It was all journey to cloud, and then all these clients and organizations have gone to cloud, realize it's abhorrently expensive.
Is this happening, Jane? Are you seeing this happening?
Oh, absolutely. I think, that concept of sovereignty, particularly in the current geopolitical environment, I think is hugely prescient and pertinent.
I mean, the European Euro HPC, they're building 7 or 8 of these like AI mega factories, I call them, where it's like macro scale, billions of euros, and they're putting in the latest and greatest technology. The one at Seneca, just outside Bologna, is this hybrid Leonardo supercomputer, and
that looked amazing.
The IQM quantum machine, 54 qubit. I didn't realize the difference between 20 odd qubit and 50 qubit isn't double, it's exponential the way these things work. It's unbelievable. And they're building these hybrid systems. It feels like they're building a portal into the future of computing. And there's a nervousness, there's an excitement. You know, it's something very real. I know when we talk about AI versus the real world, you go to one of those, Jane, I would encourage you to try and get out to there, because you know even the car park is all being built. You know, the redesign the road to go around the building. It feels like something really important is happening there.
Yeah, because I think this concept of sovereignty, sovereign AI, investing in the infrastructure, it's hugely key at the moment. I mean, I did start to feel that the UK is making some good moves towards that. I think counter to maybe some of the geopolitical situations, you know, we've signed various pacts and treaties. I sort of feel that from a digital economy perspective, we're actually really starting to move this forward.
Are you seeing that in your role? Are you seeing growth, new roles? Like,
I think we are. I mean, I think it's hard. Every day is different, isn't it? And I found month to month. If I just look at this, so I feel last year ended with the market ramping up. I think January, February felt like it started well, and I think March then there was a bit of a nervousness, and then we've had all the the recent geopolitical macro factors, challenges with Trump, tariffs, trade, etc. So there's like an intermediate cooling. But I think to your point, I do think that the aggregate feeling is one of positivity and investment in the future and technologies supporting or augmenting, maybe a better word, that journey.
When you start to understand a little bit about quantum computing and the fact that observation controls behaviour, then I have actually reflected, certainly in recent engagements, that I need to be much more deliberate about observing with a positive lens, because I believe that will create positive experiences and environments.
Well, what have we dedicated? I think it's 900 million, $1 billion for infrastructure, for something like the Brit GPT idea, right? 100 million or so, I think, for training. The question is that enough? Will that be a drop in the ocean? How do we? And I guess then we you look at something like a DeepSeek coming along against a Chat GPT, and ostensibly, what did they spend? Single digit, double digit millions training it versus OpenAI's double, triple digit millions in training, and arguably they did it with more basic, rudimentary hardware. So that sort of proves the point that the right optimized, efficient, optimistic viewpoint can clearly drive a much better outcome. Well,
I think it's all moving so quick. What took $1 billion 6 months ago may now only be a couple of million. So which that removes competitive moats. If you think about it, traditionally infrastructure, you could build something that everybody knew was going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of intellectual horsepower.
Yeah, first mover advantage.
But yeah, and you got to market first. But once you'd built it, the barrier to entry for anybody else was so high in terms of finance, people, skills. You had some sort of competitive advantage. Whereas I look at it now, and the barriers to entry are exponentially dropping every day. So the idea that a ChatGPT or a DeepSeek or a Microsoft, just because they're big, they have competitive moats, or I think is a flawed assessment of business right now.
Absolutely.
The increase in democratization of giving people the tools and skills to be able to build stuff really quickly and very cheaply. Whether we disagree with the fact that it's been built upon intellectual property or things it's been trained on, the reality is the seduction to build stuff quickly and cheaply creates a more competitive environment than I've ever seen.
Absolutely. And then it comes down to, do you have the will? Do you have the interest, the insight? You don't want to leave the party behind, really. But better to compete in the race and get better in terms of where you place.
It comes to the point that you said at the start, and we want to revisit this, which is purpose. So when you're speaking to people, whether they're recruiting or being recruited, how do you get that? How do you synthesize that sense of purpose?
I think there's a mix of asking about people's motivations. This is where I think you've got to build up a wider contextualized picture of an individual. Also, how they were supported within an organization. What lights their fire. A question I always like to ask people is, where do you get your energy from? Is it people? Is it solving a problem? Is it, is it understanding the context of someone? Is it, are you a great server or are you a better returner of serve? I would say, me personally, I am a better returner of serve than a server. I'm terrible at serving anyway, by the way. But I'm the sort of person where, it's that second bounce off an idea. So some people are completely original thinkers, but sometimes those people might struggle in the context of a team or leading within a team, right? So, you have your person who is your kind of idea factory, then someone else has to make it real, right? I guess this is kind of a classic situation in terms of CEO, COO, or CEO, chief of staff. You need to kind of build that diversified team of individuals of purpose.
So, and are you still finding purpose in your role?
In terms of my role that I do,
Yeah.
Absolutely, because I get my energy from people. So that's, for me, supporting clients traverse this new paradigm gives me a lot of purpose, right? I might not be the one coming up with the new model, but if I can put together the team that builds the model, then that gives me a lot of satisfaction and purpose, and knowing that, that process is one that the constituent parts or actors within that ensemble couldn't have done alone, right? So that's where I find my purpose.
And how do you know you've succeeded?
Couple of things. In this example that we're talking about here, the person gets hired. They stay with the organization. They meet their goals. These are some of the KPIs and the things that I think towards. And, great affirmation for me. Do they become a client? Because then I think that's really completing the circle. Then, then you're helping the next stage of the purpose cycle start to propagate.
So whilst I'm in the volatility of the market, what you're doing is you're seeing the volatility, and then your purpose is to guide businesses and people through that volatility.
Smoothing. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully eradicating some of that risk and volatility, 100%. Because as you know, as a business owner and an entrepreneur, yourself as an executive, the challenges are the ones you either don't foresee or don't have the time to solve yourself. So then professional services exist. And, what do? You're bringing in expertise, you're outsourcing some of that, but with authenticity to people who can hopefully eliminate some of that risk and collaborate on the right answer. I mean, the answer is never riskless, but hopefully we've done the groundwork together to bring value to that decision and to that output.
I mean, one thing that impresses me about you, Jane, is that the conversation today is fresh. You have learnt and progressed so much since we spoke last. So, what are you doing to stay so up to speed and so connected with the volatility?
I think you've got to have a omni-channel approach to education, don't you? Really, it's listening to the BASELINE podcast. It's listening to
Do you know something? Oh, sorry, go on.
It's listening to other channels. I think it's being connected at different ends of the experience spectrum as well, right? Back to that piece around, we get a lot of access and input to boards, to leaders, to individuals maybe more towards the end of their career. You learn a lot from those individuals, but you learn a lot about context from those at the start, right? So it's kind of having that access throughout the supply chain. I think different news media channels. I think you've just got to be open to all of it. Back to that point around, are you a growth mindset lifelong learner or not? And I think that's the differentiator for any organisation, for any example.
Do you think the dynamics of experience are changing with AI?
Has to be, right, because what is experience now? Experience generally, or traditionally, let's say, is what hopefully gives an inference that this individual or this decision is going to be safer, better, based on that experience. But now that experience is augmented, right? So I think as we've explored in this conversation, it is a little bit up in the air. So then it comes back to craft, purpose, authenticity, value.
There's certainly a trend now that I've seen of this idea of harvesting encrypted data, banking data, health data, insights, all sorts of things, with a view that, yes, they can't open it now because it would take 1 billion years of classical computing. But if in the next 5 years they get access to a highly parallel quantum computer that's really good at breaking, encryption, then they could open it all up.
Yeah.
So, how do you possibly bring back comfort other than some form of retrospectively applied quantum safe encryption? How do you, bring comfort to those companies who will be obliterated?
And this is the biggest time bomb or conversation that's happening from a sort of digital security, cybersecurity conversation. Because while we've had a very wide-ranging chat on the applications of AI, there's still a kind of a contextualized element of that decision. Whereas, as you say, the second that quantum computer falls into the hands and suddenly all encryption is invalid, that's a millennium bug kind of on steroids moment.
So with all of this, the rate in change, your deep understanding and connection to the volatility of the reality of the market, and your shepherding and guiding of companies and people through this time, which doesn't feel as though this storm's going to go away, by the way, Jared. I think people like you and your skills are just increasingly important to retaining stability. This idea that in the UK, maybe there's a sense of isolationism and potentially protectionism. You're seeing the application of AI across all of these, the emergence of the chief AI officer, new roles. Do you still believe that we are moving to a utopia, or where are we on utopia or dystopia?
A lot's changed since the last time we caught up, but I still think the opportunities for utopia are there. But I think the risks of dystopia are higher.